Welcome to the Dr. K Show. I am Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, a naturopathic doctor with nearly 4 decades of clinical experience, author and owner of the Karlfeldt Center. Here, we dive deep into the worlds of health, consciousness, self-improvement, spirituality, and the topics others might shy away from. Every week, I'll bring you thought-provoking discussions with leading authors, groundbreaking scientists, Nobel Prize winners, and experts shaping the future of our understanding. Together, we'll explore ideas that inspire transformation and elevate your health and purpose. Don't forget to check out the free ebook, The Science and Spirit of Transformation, available in the show notes. It's packed with actionable insights to help you on your journey of self-discovery and optimal health. And while you're here, hit follow, leave a review, and share the show with someone who needs a dose of inspiration today. Well, today I have with me Matt Young. Matt Young, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
No, thank you very much, Michael, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you've had kind of an interesting journey. I mean, you started as a top athlete, and you moved into guiding people into top performance. Yeah, so. Do you mind just kind of sharing your kind of a little bit of your journey so people understand kind of where you're coming from and why you kind of moved in the direction you did?
Absolutely. I mean, as you alluded to, I was a professional football player, as you guys stateside might say, a professional soccer player for many years, performing at quite an elite level, quite a high level of performance. And I did that for many, many years. And I loved football. I loved everything about it. I loved what it gave my life. I loved what the expression of that performance. But I always recognized that I always used football to mask over some deeper insecurities and worries in my life and fears. And the identity of a footballer, of who I was, allowed me to forget about all of the things that I didn't want to pay attention to. And so I did that for many, many years. And then that's all very well and good until eventually your football career comes to a crashing halt. And then you'll have to confront those very things that you've been trying to push down and push away for so long. And that was definitely the case for me. And so at that stage of my life, when my professional football career come towards an end, I was left with no alternative, although I did try others, than to deal with the fears and worries and anxieties of my life. And that was quite a painful process, mentally, emotionally, during that time. But when you come out of the other side of that and you see the freedom that it can allow you, that's really what drove me at that stage to want to expand and help and give that impact to others as well. And so it was essentially, that's why I sit here today doing what I do, working with high performance athletes, everyday people, about freeing them from what holds them back so they can be free mentally, emotionally in their lives as well.
And you spent like 15 years, studying peak performance, and you worked with top companies, top athletes, in the world, and I'm really curious. I mean, in your mind, what distinguishes a person that is a peak performer versus somebody that is, I would say, kind of moderate or tries and like to do well? What is the difference? What makes a peak performer excel?
I think there's a few nuances that allow peak performance to be sustained at a certain level, but I know this answer is going to be overly simplistic and maybe not the detailed answer that maybe the listeners want, the sexy answer at least. But it is very simply a case of what they're willing to tolerate from their standards. A consistency of a standard. We can all eat healthily one afternoon. It's a different thing to say, for the next 2-3 years, I'm not going to eat chocolate. And it's a sustained level of performance, sustained level of a standard, not about necessarily in their performance out there, but what they demand from themselves. And whether I see that in business, in TV, in music, in sport, in corporate companies, all of which I've worked in, there's a demand and there's a discipline, would probably be a more concise word, within themselves to deliver at a certain level. And that's oftentimes where I think separates mediocrity to peak performance, lies in how disciplined can someone be in their own personal standards to what they adhere to. And that's oftentimes a very key part of it.
And you talked a little bit about your own identity, your own fears, you know, who you were, and you try to cover that up with, you know, being a professional athlete, which somebody would say, well, that is peak performance in itself, and yet you felt that you hadn't really achieved, you know, what you felt that you could achieve or be who you wanted to be. So how does a person then, you know, what was your journey like in understanding, you know, what a peak performance was?
Great. Well, I always believed that peak performance was what you attain out there. You know, you look at tennis, you look at Roger Federer or Serena Williams, Novak Djokovic, peak performers. You look at swimming, Michael Phelps. You look at NBA, you look at Steph Curry, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. These are peak performers. And so to me, that was always my framework. I need to go and perform at the highest level, which means being a professional footballer in England, the 0.1 of the 0.1%. I am a peak performer. And I suppose to Joe Blogs, who might look in from the outside, they might say, you know what, Matt is a peak performer in that way. But I never felt that. I never believed that I'd arrived there. I never believed that that's who I was. I just believed that this was the identity and the role in which I was playing and what I was doing. And I was really driven to try and achieve more, because I thought the more I can achieve out there, the more of a peak performer I'm going to become. But that's really where my narrative started to change a little bit, because I think we can achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, but never arrive. And that's why when my football career come to a crashing halt, I was then left with that deepest fear was, well, you're not really a peak performer whatsoever, because what's really left underneath? And so that's really where my narrative shifted towards what a peak performer is now. You know, in terms of the standard of what I do, the standard is how I show up for myself. The standard is who Matt Young is. The standard is how I behave on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day, week-to-week basis, just within myself and the values and morals that I have. And then when I take that to sport or to business or to relationships or to finance, great, I can use them in my areas. But peak performance for me isn't defined by any more what goes on out there. That will simply be the byproduct of the standards that I have within myself.
So it's almost like a shift in identity, versus instead of looking kind of the outward expression. I mean, the outward expression must be a way to kind of show what's going on inside, but it seems like your identity almost has to shift prior to just looking at what you can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but it's the, I might butcher this quote here, but it's the Jim Carrey quote of, I hope everyone could become rich and famous to realise that they don't want to become rich and famous. Because ultimately we're all on this treadmill of life where we're chasing the next promotion, we're chasing the next high, we're chasing the next accolade or achievement, because we think that that's going to give us something, that's going to give us a sense of worth or empowerment or belief. And for a short time it does. But when that fades, we're left with who we are. And as you said perfectly, for me, that was a shift in identity for me at that stage. That was a real, truckload of information. Oh, you've got to have to deal with this right now. Where I had to change the narrative from being out there to, right, what do I bring? What do I demand of myself as who Matt Young is? Who does Matt Young like to see himself as? Because when I focused on that, I can just take me everywhere. If it's buried in football, then great, I might be a peak performer from the outside, but when that ends, what's left? And that was the change.
Yeah. So it's, so when an individual, essentially, because we always, like we expressed many times, is that we always look at, the outside world and having it give it to us, somehow it's going to fuel us to become who we want to be. But it's instead of then kind of looking at that way, then looking more at, who can I become and how can I shift so that the world around me can manifest differently.
It's absolutely spot on the way that you've explained that. I think we all live outside in. We all can live a little bit like life needs to bend, or life needs to try and mold to who I am. And that's where sometimes we can get a little bit stuck, I believe, because I like to take the approach that if I can be the fluid, flexible, agile version of me, then that can fit into whatever circumstance, situation, place I'm in. And we're on the topic of peak performance. I can bring that peak level of performance, whatever that looks like, because I know how to navigate those situations. If I'm fixed in, I can only operate this way based on this circumstance and this, I'm very limited as a human being, and that's what I was for many, many years. If I was at the football ground, or I was in that vicinity, or I could portray Matt Young the footballer, I was okay. I was at ease. If there was anything outside of that, I lost a puppy dog. And that was obviously not going to work.
And when you kind of refine yourself, or you find your identity and you set that standard within yourself that this is what I accept, and you set that for peak performance, essentially, even if you lose like football or soccer, or you lose basketball, you still have you still have those standards, and you're still able then to, wherever you transplant yourself, you're going to be able to produce that peak performance and that result, because wherever you are, there you go. And wherever you go, there you are.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's the difference with where I was to where I am now. Many years down the line, since then, I've got into ultra marathon running. And I'm currently training to swim the English Channel between the UK and France. Now, I wasn't into running. I wasn't into swimming. But I had that shift within me at that stage to go, no, I back me. I back the peak performance that I can bring and the standards of what I can bring. And let me take that to that new area. Let me take that to that new dimension. Let me take that to these different levels of performance. And let's grow in that area. It's the same way with my work and what I do with my clients. Let me take that part of me to that area. Because when I do that, then the experiences, life is a lot freer, and I'm not limited to saying this is who I have to be because of, exactly as you alluded to, my identity is stuck in that one place.
And because you work then with people that are already high performers, I'm curious, so when they come to you, what are some of the challenges that you see in these people that are already high performers, but they want to get to that next level? What do you tend to see that is inhibiting them from taking that next step?
Two core things, if I'm honest, across the board. Two very core things. The first is what makes someone incredibly successful at times is because of how mentally strong and mentally agile they are. And what I mean by that is if a problem comes up, they can problem solve it fast and move on to the next thing. If there's an issue with their performance level, they can navigate it, they can be aware of it, they know how to move past it, they know how to move on. If there's conflict at work or whatever it may be, they can deal with it and still get the result. Now that is wonderful, really, really wonderful for many areas of our life. What I find is what peak performers, if any area, what they need is they don't need more coaching or work or touch points on the technical side of what they do. They need more understanding of the mental and emotional side of how they operate. And the framework of what they do to produce success out there won't be the same way that we do in here. We all know that if we have a problem and we think about a problem and think mentally and emotionally about it, it probably just gets us a little bit more stuck. And so that's always one of the key things, because it's not letting go, but it is an understanding that taking a shovel to a hole and digging deeper isn't going to get you closer to getting out of that hole. It's a double-edged sword. And that's oftentimes a area that I see with peak performers. They're very stuck in their head. The other side of what I can see at times is when the standards of what I alluded to at the start that make them a peak performer, that floods into an area of perfectionism. And an area of perfectionism where they begin to say things need to be perfect, they need to be this level of intricate detail, because eventually that can act like a barrier to their success, because then all of a sudden I'm not going to take action anymore because it needs to be perfect. And where that standard then becomes a perfection, that can often muddy the waters. There's a fine line between the two. A standard is what I demand of myself. A perfection is what I need it to be out there. And that's always a key barrier that I see between peak performers who are wanting to have got so far, but they need to take it to another level, is they feel like they've maxed out their standard. And now they're trying to perfect things out there. They need this circumstance, they need this environment, they need things to be a certain way. Oh, well, I can't do it because of this. And when that happens, it's a barrier to their personal progress.
I mean, that seems like such a fine line to walk, between where you, as a perfectionist, where you're setting high standards and you're only accepting high standards, so you can perform at a peak level, but then to not become so detail-oriented and so into that it's got to be perfect that you're interfering with yourself. I mean, how do people navigate that? How do you consult people to navigate that? Because that's got to be really hard to know when you're shifting too much in one direction versus the other.
Well, I always think that people are their best psychologists. We're all our own best psychologists. And whenever we feel friction in a certain area, mentally, emotionally, I think it's simply a case of, is someone aware to that? Or is someone trying to ignore that, dismiss that? Prime example was me with my football career. I was very aware that I had some quote unquote skeletons in the closet that I needed to deal with, but I didn't want to look that way. So I'll just carry on doing this over here. I knew there was some friction within me, because whenever I wasn't being the role of the footballer, there was unease, there was anxiety, there was fear, there was worry, there was doubt, there was these things. So I knew that, but I didn't want to face that way. And so when it comes to working with people, I think we all have moments where we enlighten ourselves. And it's never, I don't believe, my place to go to someone and say, you need this right now. Because who am I to ever say that to anyone? Who's anyone to say that to anyone in that manner? What I find is that people will sometimes have their own awareness around this area and begin to go, I'm at a stage where I've noticed some friction and I need to change that. How can we navigate that? And that's where we'll sit down, we'll look at where the friction's occurring in stress, overwhelm, worry, doubt, anxiety, fear, perfectionism, you name it. And then start to get a game plan in place of how we can, one, dissect that, but then to elevate and move past that. And that's always generally the process of how I would take it.
I mean, a lot of us, we deal, like you're talking about skeleton in the closet, a lot of us deal with belief systems, traumas that really then interfere with our ability to move forward. And frequently these things may be subconscious. I mean, you may not even kind of be aware of the patterns that you're dealing with that are causing these frictions. So is there a way to kind of move into a realization what some of these things are that may be inhibiting me from becoming who I want to be?
Yes, I often think there's two ways which we arrive here. Conscious awareness, and a conscious awareness is where I actually sit back and I look at where I am and I say, is this where I want to be? Mentally, emotionally, am I happy? Am I content? Am I satisfied with where I am? If I am, and I can truthfully say that in the cold light of day, great, we can keep moving forwards. If not, what do I need to learn? How do I need to grow? What information do I need to seek? What guidance do I need to get to be able to deal with that? That comes through conscious awareness. Most of us live automatically on autopilot through life, and we're just on this treadmill of life and we're not consciously present. When you can start to become consciously present, you start to become aware of how you feel, the friction in your life. So that would be one area. The second area, which is the one I don't recommend, which is the one that I fell into, was you choose or you become so unconscious to life and its signs and the friction that you're feeling, that life then has to deliver quite a strong and direct way via pain to then awaken you to realizing that there's some things that need to change here. And the truthful answer is, for the majority of people, they will do the latter, because we're all the same human beings. Unless it's urgent, unless it's right there in front of us, we generally dismiss it. We generally put it off for another day. We all know we should eat healthier. We all know we should exercise more. We all know we should, take better care of our mind and body. But when do we? When we go and see the doctor and they say you've got high cholesterol, you've got early onset heart disease, whatever it may be, and all of a sudden we change our eating habits overnight. We join the gym the next day because it's urgent then. Life's delivered us that sign. We felt friction in that area for years. For years I felt lethargic. For years I've been tired. For years, I haven't been able to walk up a flight of stairs without my heart beating out my chest. But I haven't been consciously present in that area, so I've never done anything about it. Life delivers a painful circumstance to us often. That's what gets the message through to us. So they would be the two core areas I would recommend to the listeners, not to wait until life delivers that message for you. Look to become more consciously present now. And where's the friction in your life? And therefore, then the steps of what I just outlined.
And I see that in my work. I mean, I'm a health professional, naturopathic doctor, and so you have the difference between people that are working on their body even though they are not symptomatic, because they want to optimize function. And then you have the other group that come then in with, severe health issues, cancer, autoimmune, whatever. And at that time, like you're saying, the pain is so big that they're needing to change habits and needing to change mindset, lifestyle in order to be able to mitigate the pain and clear out the pain. But the best is, like you're saying, the first option, which is not the option you chose, is to work on yourself and reach that higher level of optimum being, without having to wait for symptoms or pain or life situations that push you into that direction.
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And there's a certain element of human nature to this because, you look across the board with it. With health, we wait until the dire moments until we start looking after ourselves. With stress, we wait until we're completely burnt out before we start prioritizing a bit of self-care. With our finances, We wait until we're really close to debt or in debt before we start taking care of these things. With our relationships, we wait until they're really stretched and we're really estranged from our partner to actually start to put effort in. Because as human beings, we're very bright, but we can be a little dim at times. And we're all the same in that nature, that we won't ever do something unless it's immediate and or urgent. If it's immediate and or urgent, we'll act on it fast. And so that's often a big point of, if I am delivering a presentation to a company or I'm working with a big sports team, my words are one thing. Allowing and getting them to action it is something completely different. How I bridge that gap is by making whatever it is that I'm looking to deliver and help them with quite urgent for them, and explaining why now is that time. Because without that, as human beings, that's fine, I'll deal with that another day. And that another day turns into another month, a year, before we know it was 5 years ago.
I mean, as human beings, we're wired for survival and we're wired for energy conservation. So, like you're saying, because we are not then facing survival, and here we're looking at something that consumes energy, we tend to not choose to do something that is not immediate. So that's exactly what you're saying. You need to then create a scenario where something becomes urgent and then is worth consuming that energy.
Absolutely. And we know enough from neuroscience and things at this stage to know that the brain can't differentiate between what's real and what's not. Our perception of reality is oftentimes stronger, or is stronger than reality itself. Because our perception will drive our fears, our feelings, our emotions, how we're going to act and behave in a certain area. And so I often do this with myself. There will be things that I need to complete. There will be things in my day-to-day life that, I need to do that later on today. And I'll play this same game with myself. I'm like, no, here's why it needs to be urgent. Because if not, I might list a couple of reasons. Or at this stage, I know myself well enough to challenge myself, because the moment I challenge myself, I'm like, right, come in, I'll show you. And I'll get that done super fast. But ultimately, we need to create a perception within ourselves as to why now. Why is now the time? Because it'll be the same for your listeners who are listening to our voices right now. This will be resonating. Yes, this makes sense. Yeah, I can see there's friction in my life. But there'll be a separation between those who, okay, you know what, I'm currently in the car taking the kids to school, or I'm currently on the train on the way to work, or I'm currently walking the dog, or wherever it is that I might be doing. Between that and, I'll do that later, and this podcast ends and they go, right, you know what, let me do something right now to put my flag in the ground, to start to put wheels in motion, to start to create some changes. Because that person has made it urgent in their life, and they're the ones that will bear the fruits of their labour. And that's ultimately, in human behaviour, one of the key things that allows us to move into action, to achieve peak performance quicker, and to stay at that high-end level.
And I mean, so as any kind of performer like you playing football, there are certain skill sets that an individual, I mean, in addition to then having the mindset and quality of standards and identity, who I am, this is, and working on yourself. But, doing any kind of art, there's a certain skill set that an individual will need to kind of obtain. I always remember, my initial career, I wanted to go into engineering and math. I loved math. My math teacher, one of the things that he said, has always stuck with me, and said that, the people that do well in math, they're not the bright ones. They're not the ones that, already they come in with all these gifts into the world. They're the ones that are hardworking, disciplined, and they follow a certain pathway in order to be able to reach a certain level of excellence. So are there, for a peak performer, are there certain qualities, or certain, things that a person need to look at just in order to be able to move forward in their ability to deliver?
Right. Oh, well, as we've already discussed with that, I think a discipline and a level of standard within themselves is a non-negotiable. It's a non-negotiable. It's a level within me that says it comes back to that word you used earlier, an identity of who we are. This is how I operate in this particular area. I don't, in the area of health, I don't go to the gym or go for that walk once if I feel like it, twice every other day. No, this is something I'm consistent with in my approach in that particular area. That is a level of how I approach that. That would be number one. The other thing that I would say that I see a lot with peak performers, and I heard this quote ages ago, can't remember where now, but it was, your vibe will create your tribe. And what I mean by that is any peak performer who I have worked with, seen, looked at from afar, there's a certain energy to how they show up for themselves. There's a certain energy to their nature of how they show up for themselves. There's not just, I'm going to get that done today. It's achieving whatever it may be with a purpose, with a sense of direction, with a sense of knowing this is where I'm heading. There's an energy in which they show up. And I think if one thing that sometimes, like you said, the human condition is to preserve energy, is to sort of keep ourselves and just to survive. It can sometimes, I don't want to say counteract our nature, but it can sometimes feel a little bit, that's a bit of an effort to do that. But if we want to achieve peak performance in an area and we bring a certain energy aligned with a certain standard of how we're going to show up for ourselves, there's a cocktail there that's going to produce success no matter what area it may be. I'm not going to say that's going to make it in the next week or the next month, but consistent action in that area will take you a lot further than it ever would without those two factors in place. And on the flip side of it, I think, when people are listening, go, okay, this makes sense. I say, look at the flip side. Look at someone who shows up with no energy and no discipline in any area of their life. We can already see the results without even knowing that person. Someone who shows up with no energy and vitality for their health and no standard of how they're going to operate with their health, they end up feeling lethargic. They might be overweight. They might even be approaching obesity. They might have high cholesterol. They might be in a place where their health isn't optimal. And it will underline be of these two core reasons. Then we have to deal with the repercussions of trying to bring up, and this is what I said about the pain, we then have to try and say, well, now I'm in this place. Now it's even harder to produce that energy and even harder to produce that standard. But I believe in meeting, I don't use this saying a lot, but meeting people where they're at and saying, right, wherever you've been exercising, and I know on the term of health here, but this could apply in any area, in the term of health or wherever it may be, if you've not exercised for the last 3 years, okay, cool. What's one way, this can often work well for the brain so it doesn't over-consume it, what's one way that you can do right now to bring a higher level of energy and a higher standard to yourself that says, right, you haven't got to see the whole staircase, but this is where I'm heading right now. What's one thing that you could do? Well, I suppose I could start by getting X amount of steps in each day. Great. Then let's focus on that for a set period of time. Because once you do that, all of a sudden for the following week, okay, now I'm going to double those steps. Wonderful. The next week, do you know what? I think I've always really loved swimming. I might try and go for a swim alongside that. A month down the line, we're swimming 3 times a week. We're doing 10K steps a day. And we're looking back going, a month ago, I don't recognise that person. How we showed up via our energy, the standard that we've had within ourselves to stay consistent there.
Yeah, and I assume also with, because we all only have so much energy, and so much time. So when you talk about discipline, I would assume also that means, being very intentional with how you use your time and your energy. I mean, a lot of people, they're just out there, they're, scrolling on their phone and kind of depleting their neurotransmitters, the dopamine, they're depleting their time. So we have to be, when you set the intention, then also be intentional how you use your energy and your time in order to be able, and that's with relationships as well. I mean, just everything that needs to be in line with your purpose and with who you are.
I've used this saying for years now, and I think my wife sometimes is the bearer of this, not in the best way at times. But I often say, if anyone, myself included, ever says that they didn't have time, all they've told me is it's not a high enough of a priority for them. Because, let me be clear, I'm not saying to everyone, you have to go running marathons each day. But 5, 10 minutes, whatever it may be. We've all got 10 minutes. I don't care who we are. We've all got 10 minutes a day to get up and do that. We've all got 15 minutes to go and do those things. But like you say, we might have a scroll. We might sit there and kill a bit of time watching some TV that isn't serving us. We might sit at the dinner table and get bogged down by some low conversation that depletes some of our energy and the vibe of where we are. And I think sometimes when it comes to where we are, we prioritize and we complete things in our life that are an absolute priority. An absolute priority. Listeners saying to this, they'll go, you know what, I'm a parent, I'm a friend, I'm a worker, I'm a son or daughter, I have to take my kids here, I have to do all these things, I have to do all of these things. I'm like, great. Why don't you just, not pick up the kids from school and go and do some exercise instead, as an example? People look at me like, I can't do that. Of course you can't, because it's an absolute priority for you. Now imagine if you made this area of your life the same exact absolute priority for you. I'm not saying substitute, but all of those periphery areas that I just mentioned, the low-vibed conversation, the doom scrolling, the sitting there and watching junk TV, whatever it may be. How about if this was as much of a priority to you as it was to make sure that you picked up your kids from school? How much better would your life be? And when you start to open that perspective, people start to, as you say, prioritize their time, prioritize where their energy is going. And then all of a sudden, when people start to reap the benefits of that, it becomes almost like a drug where we go, this feels good. I want to keep doing that. And then all of a sudden we get stuck in a good cycle.
Yeah, so it's kind of like investing, like you're investing money, and with compounded interest. So you just feel as you're starting the beginning, then you feel that you don't have the money to invest. But then after a while, you see then the result of that compounding interest and the amount of, the money that's building up in your bank account. And it's got to be the same when you're investing energy into things that really matters, and you see how that really grows, and then all of a sudden that kind of fuels you to do it even more.
Absolutely, it's the golf analogy. I'm not sure if you're into golf yourself, but I'm a keen golfer. If I said to you, let's bet, let's have a nice friendly wager, 20 cents on the first hole. And, we'll have 20 cents between us on the first hole. And, if no one wins the first hole, it will just roll over. Now, the person listening to this goes, 20 cents? Okay, yeah, fine. I'll do that. Right. But there's also the side of it that goes, it's not really much I'm going to gain from that, is it? No, there's not. But what you find through the golf compounded interest analogy here is that 20 cents turns into 40 cents on hole 2, 80 cents on hole 3, $1.60 on hole 4, $3.20 on hole 5. You compound that interest by hole 18, you're playing that hole 18, the final hole, for $13,000 just through compounded interest of 20 cents. And this is oftentimes the exact what you say here. People think that, I'm going to get up and I'm going to eat a lettuce leaf today and I'm going to go for a walk, and tomorrow I'm going to have Baywatch abs. And it's not quite like that, but the compounded interest of it will pay you back in the long term to a point where that $13,000 all of a sudden now I'm interested. But that comes from that initial 20 cents bet, 20 cents wager that we're willing to put into the pot.
Yeah, I love that. And Matt, how can people, because you work with people and you work with groups, you're an author. I mean, how can people learn more about you and benefit from what you do?
Yeah, naturally. Well, I have quite a large social media presence at this stage. So people can find me on social media. That's generally Matt Young LC, MattYoung with the letter L, the letter C. Likewise, if they wanted to look into further of my work, www.mattyounglc.com. We're on YouTube where we're producing trainings and things. And a lot of the time, I'll be giving a masterclass or I'll be at a speaking event or somewhere around the world giving a form of impact in so many different areas. So there's always lots of different avenues there. We have free trainings and things that people are able to download from our website. So by all means, for your listeners, I'd really love for them to gain further value in that way as well.
Well, wonderful. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking this time. I know you just finished a move to another beautiful country. And taking this time and chatting with me today, that thank you so much.
No, I really appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate being here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Dr. K Show. I hope today's episode sparked new ideas, challenged your perspective, or inspired you to take a step toward a healthier, more empowered life. Remember, you can download my free ebook, The Science and Spirit of Transformation, right now. It's waiting for you in the show notes. Don't miss this resource to deepen your understanding and continue your journey of growth. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a review, follow us, and share this episode with friends or family. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations to listeners like you. Until next time, I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, reminding you to live with purpose, curiosity, and courage.